I think people were very quick to learn, and we, identified patterns to help people expose their information as effectively as possible. Better documentation improves our answers, and better answers incentivize people to, maintain and update their documentation and their way to think about these things.
Welcome to Nerd Out at Spotify, where we bring you behind the curtain of the world's most popular audio streaming subscription service. Machine learning, open source, clouds, tabs versus spaces. We'll talk to Spotify engineers about interesting tech issues, big and small. I'm Dave Zolotusky, principal engineer at Spotify. When you're trying to find information inside your org, whether that's looking for an API or getting help with a backend service, it's hard to know where to start. Our teams are already using third-party AI chatbots to help us code and answer general questions. But those chatbots don't have access to our internal knowledge. So we built our own chatbot. We call it AiKA, our AI knowledge assistant. Using retrieval-augmented generation, or RAG, AiKA pulls information from internal sources to generate helpful, context-aware answers. But AiKA isn't just a chatbot. It's a chatbot platform that all of our teams can build on. And it's been a hit. Every week, about 25% of Spotify employees and 86% of Spotify developers are using AiKA to help them find answers. So what does it take to build something like this? What's the difference between a chatbot and a chatbot platform? And how do you make sure that your chatbot's answers stay accurate and useful? To answer those questions, I'm joined by two humans, Spotify senior engineers Majd Salman and Jofre Mateu. We'll talk about how we built AiKA to solve our knowledge-sharing problems, and what the future might look like as AiKA takes on more agentic capabilities. While AiKA started as a tool for Spotify's teams, it's now available for any engineering org as part of Spotify Portal for Backstage, our internal developer portal for enterprise customers. That means your company can use the same AI assistant and developer tools that we use at Spotify. Head to backstage.spotify.com to sign up for a free trial to try it yourself. All right, let's get started. It's great to have both of you on. I'm super excited to do this episode. But before we get going, I just want to hear a little bit about what you do at Spotify, how long you've been there. Tell me a little bit about your career, things like that. Let's start with Jofre.
I'm Jofre. I've been working at Spotify for 8 years. I started as a platform engineer for Android tooling, catering to our internal Android engineers. Since then, I started working at some point more as a data engineer, still in platform, looking at productivity insights. And since a couple of years ago, when we started this first like a work stream and then a team for AiKA, so we've been all the engineers there doing a bit of everything, but also focusing maybe a bit more on the data parts of our platform.
Cool. All right. And Majd, could you also introduce yourself and tell us what you do here at Spotify?
Yes. So I'm Majd. I've been at Spotify for 8 years now, actually doing Android infrastructure, mobile infrastructure, build systems, that kind of thing. I moved over to data engineering, and then with the whole LLM craze, moved into this space, doing a bit of everything, as is, I think, everyone in this quite small team, but perhaps more focused on exploratory things, looking at the next thing. Now, lately, it's been agentic stuff and MCPs, that kind of thing.
Let's start there. So tell me, what is AiKA? Why is it a fun thing for you to work on?
AiKA is our platform for internal knowledge assistance using AI. It's something that started evolving from initial hacks that people were working on, more like in isolation, pretty much trying to do question answers with the first versions that were capable of that, mostly, I think, GPT 3.5. But yeah, it started as an effort to platformize. It's something that we kind of do a lot in our corner of the company, in the platform mission. Basically, all these hacks were kind of doing the same, question answering, augmenting LLMs with corners of the internal knowledge that the company has. But they were not sharing any infrastructure or any knowledge between them. So every time that someone wanted to hack, I want to have a bot that answers questions about how to do data or how to do mobile or backend. Everything needed to start from scratch. So we were tasked to make a platform out of it so everyone could plug in the platform and reuse what we were doing.
I see. So tell me a little bit more about that. You keep calling it a platform. So does that mean that we still would have a whole bunch of these different tools and that they just share infrastructure and share the platform? What does AiKA look like as a thing?
Yeah, so if we rewind a bit, we were in this scattered landscape of people seeing the opportunity to leverage these LLMs. I think we were up to something like 8 different chatbots or solutions internally. Perhaps the first noticeable use case was the support case. So people are creating these and, of course, duplicating the efforts in terms of infrastructure, learning about how to best fine-tune the system, do things like chunking, what vector databases, and so on and so forth. There was a learning curve to that. So in becoming a platform, for us, it means we have a couple of different surfaces where we expose this base interaction with our common knowledge source. We have the Backstage product, the Backstage AiKA chat client, if you will. And then we have 2 Slack bots, a Slack support bot and a general Slack bot. And those share the same infrastructure, the same backend. And then we've opened that up to Python SDKs. We built that on top of the platforms and open it up to other developers to ingest their own data the same way we do. So there's no difference between clients that we build on top of the platform and the clients that are possible to build for others.
I think most of those first hacks or initiatives have sort of been abandoned, but that doesn't mean that other new things have started on top of like our SDKs or our APIs. So the idea of being a platform is just offering everyone to craft different experiences, but without having to deal with all the ingestion part or having to deal with creating their backend. Now we're working also on expanding these capabilities to create agents in a way that you don't have to do everything. You can just decide what things to pick from our knowledge base and run out with it.
A large part of being a platform as well is this, creating recognizable patterns and identities, unifying the interactions across Spotify. So when you see AiKA in the Slack channels, you know how to interact with it, as opposed to 8 different bots. So you know sort of what to expect of the single experience.
That makes sense. I guess before, a lot of them were just some sort of Q&A bot thing, and AiKA consolidated that all into one place where you have the single personality to this bot that appears in a bunch of different places. And then you talked about ingesting data the way we do. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What is the way you do? And then what does it mean for someone to come along, like rather than building whatever data AiKA, they just add data engineering expertise to AiKA?
So we started AiKA drawing knowledge from TechDocs, our docs platform for the engineering side of the company, and also the Slack information from support channels. Since then, we've also been incrementing more and more. We added information from our organizational data, but also we've been opening the platform for others to ingest their own data. So at this point, I think we lost a bit track of all the things that are ingested and not. We have a default experience that's using the things, that knowledge that we are ingesting, which is basically these 3 spaces, TechDocs, Slack, and organizational data. But we also added like some more easy ways to do manual ingestions in just pasting content in Backstage. So it's a bit easier to manage. Everyone can create a pipeline and just ingest their own collection. But users are able to customize and decide what information AiKA has access to for their conversation. So they have the power to ingest more things and have them available to chat. And then you can make it available to others or just work a bit on your own with your own data. Lately, we've been working with some part of IT that wanted to add their information that was mostly in Confluence. So they wrote a data pipeline that it's taking the content from Confluence and then just mimicking what we do for TechDocs and just ingesting everything in AiKA.
Cool. And so that data gets ingested, gets processed somehow, and then I guess there's like a nightly training of a model on this data, or like how does it then get fed into things that AiKA knows from just being a data pipeline that aggregates a bunch of data from interesting places like Confluence?
Yeah, that's, I think, a super common misconception that we do any actual training on top of the data. So perhaps to explain that, we need to explain RAG, or like the whole basis of this solution, retrieval-augmented generation. You start with some useful set of data. It gets embedded using an embedding model that translates the semantic meaning of the chunk of text into a numerical representation of a fixed length. And then that's stored in a vector database. So that's the ingestion part of it. It's storing the chunk of text together with an embedding. And then these databases are specialized databases, so you can create a fast nearest neighbor index over this vast set of knowledge. So then when a user has a question, like what version of Android Studio should I be using internally or whatever, that gets embedded using the same embedding algorithm. And then we do a search query in the vector database, retrieve the top K documents, re-rank them semantically using a different algorithm. And then that's all just provided to the model in the context. So the only way you really interact with these LLMs are through text input and text output. So at the end of the day, it has to be a text input to the model. So we provide these documents to the model to get a prompt, telling it what to do with it, answer the user's question, and so on. And hopefully you get a grounded answer in those documents. So that's where the knowledge comes from. The difference between this and fine-tuning a model, for example, is one of the benefits of RAG is that you can do this with a fairly low cost with a fairly small amount of data, as opposed to fine-tuning a model where you would need to have vast amounts of data, first of all, but it would be very costly to do that, say at the cadence required to keep information up to date internally with things like Tech Talks or Slack Conversations is a very useful data source for us as well in terms of up-to-date troubleshooting. A lot of it comes from Slack. So you would need to really be able to do that quite frequently.
So you're effectively trying to figure out what the right data is to answer whatever the question is and give that as context when AiKA is trying to answer the question. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's all about maximizing the probability that you retrieve the best possible information to answer the question.
Yeah. And so then when you compared it to fine tuning, does that mean that there's kind of, on the one hand, it's cheaper and easier with small amounts of data, but I guess then there's like a limit to the amount of data you can feed it. And then once you get past that, then you have to go to fine tuning. Is that kind of how it works?
I mean, there is no limit in this regards, I think, for most common use cases. Now, LLMs have a hugely, vastly greater context window than they had in the beginning. So when we started, we were talking about 4,000 token windows or something like that. You couldn't fit much information. Say a word is typically 2 tokens, so 8,000 words or something. Now we're up to millions. 1-2 million isn't an uncommon value. And then you can fit vast amounts of information, libraries. So then I think the case for fine-tuning isn't really, I don't think they're competing with each other. I think they serve different purposes.
I see. So then I guess when would we want to fine-tune? Or maybe just an AiKA type scenario is one where you never really want to fine-tune. That's always a great use case for RAG.
In terms of augmenting the model's knowledge, I think fine-tuning is quite costly. I don't think for the knowledge retrieval use case you would fine-tune. I think you would fine-tune maybe for things like tone of voice or style or some objective or performing some task very well, like classification or fine-tuning on a very structured type of input-output. I expect this structured output. It always has to be like this. That's probably a good use case for fine-tuning as well.
We are still aiming for a fast, like a low latency experience. And the more you provide in the context, the more it takes to generate an answer, and also the more costly it is. So we're still trying to limit the amount of information that we provide to make the answer very focused. As long as our search or retrieval part keeps performing well, despite the scaling up of the knowledge base, I think we're still good for at least this particular use case using RAG. The moment where RAG breaks a bit is when you ask expansive questions. So if you ask, give me all things that my team own, for example, you're limited by the amount of different documents that we decided as a platform level to provide to the LLM. So then it's a bit like a problem of how you manipulate the data when you're doing ingestion. Because if you don't anticipate this kind of questions and you have, let's say, one document, like this component is owned by this team, and we are serving only 5 documents per query, you're only going to get 5 components that this team owns, despite maybe being 10, 15, 500. So then in this case, if you want to be able to answer these kind of questions with RAG, you need to anticipate these kind of questions and shape your documents to be able to work with these kind of questions. And then you would have repeated information maybe, and you would have for each component what team owns this component, but also you could have, like, for a given team in a single document, a list of all the components that they own. So that's the kind of cases where RAG breaks a bit and you need to start finding ways around. And that's what we're trying to go further now with more agentic capabilities and other kind of augmented kind of tools.
Tell me a little bit about the early days with AiKA. You talked a little bit about there being a lot of hacks of similar things. How did you go from that to having one thing and potentially getting those hacks to consolidate? And then that kind of build up of momentum around usage?
I think the value proposition is clear, right? You don't have to deal with a lot of the infrastructure side of things, keeping things up to date, learning about the best ways to chunk things or the best vector databases and so on. And I think the hacks are hacks. So typically they're done out of interests or, on people's extra time or whatnot. So in terms of ownership and making this a legitimate product you can depend on, I think it's quite nice to build something on top of a platform where a lot of things are taken care of for you. And you only need to be responsible for the correctness of the information you provide.
So yeah, in the early days, it was just trying to go step by step and be like in small incrementals. But we didn't start having a pipeline that was ingesting everything every day. We started with a more static knowledge base. And yeah, I think at the beginning, there was also a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of finding out how to tune the system, because when it comes to the architecture of the system, there's a couple of things extra to make it more a platform that we implemented, but there's not like a very secret sauce to the whole thing. It's like a fairly standard RAG architecture. So it was mostly like building something small and then try to tune the retrieval of documents, how to compute the similarity, how many documents should we get. Then we later, as Majd mentioned, we added this re-ranking step where we would like over retrieve documents and then do a second like classification, a bit more fine-grained. We started basically with the Backstage client, trying to drive adoption, detecting some external champions and taking a lot of the feedback. But yeah, I mean, I have to say that it's been like a very rewarding experience and it's been very fun and a lot of learnings, but we haven't found like a very big roadblock in all that. It's been like the first year was completely hacking all the time. Like it was a very freeing experience of like
being a startup within the company.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that allowed us also to move very fast and try a lot of things at the beginning and get to some sort of stable point quite early.
Yeah. Super quickly, how long has this thing existed? I mean,
2 years almost, or is it, when can we say it began? 2023?
Like maybe a bit more than a year ago. But yeah, we started working on it almost a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Yeah, this consolidating effort, I think, started around late 2023.
And so then you were saying along the way, there were a few things you learned either about the way people were using it or things that weren't working super well. Are there like interesting inflection points of either things that worked really poorly and you had a fun time fixing it, or things that you added that just like suddenly caused people to love AiKA 10 times more? Or
I mean, I don't think there's been an inflection point like that. I think we've been quite lucky and surprised, I think, in terms of how well it worked quite early on. Of course, there were use cases where it wasn't perhaps as suitable, but I think we were lucky in terms of the way we structured information at Spotify over a long time using tech docs. That was quite well suited for ingestion and also, feeding it to an LLM. So chunking, for example, which is usually a difficult problem, wasn't that much of an issue. But also, I think we were lucky in terms of the users were very eager and quick to adopt the right patterns and ask the right questions in terms of how can I make my information available. So I think people were very quick to learn, and we, identified patterns to help people expose their information as effectively as possible. Better documentation improves our answers, and better answers incentivize people to, maintain and update their documentation and their way to think about these things, the way to structure these things. And it's been driving some of our efforts in terms of providing tooling for making your information suitable for ingestion, for example, command line interfaces, FAQ generators, that type of thing.
Some of the inflection points we are not responsible for. When the models started having longer context windows, that made the whole platform work a lot better. But of course, this is something we didn't do. We just piggybacked on the existing models, which it's been something that we've been reflecting in the team. I think it's the first time in all our careers that problems really disappear if you just do nothing and wait. If there's some problems that you need to be conscious that, like, maybe take the pain and wait for it to being solved. Like, these context window problems, you could do smart things. You could summarize the previous window, because the context would grow when there was like a lot of back and forth between AiKA and the user, because the whole conversation needs to be in context. So it would grow to a point that it would fail. So we were like wondering, should we do some eviction of initial messages, or should we summarize the conversation up to this point to clear the window? And before we were really able to implement any of that, the length of the context window just grew astronomically. And we haven't seen this problem since then, and we haven't done anything. And then I think there's been also inflection point in terms of adoption, which has been coincidentally a lot with the hack weeks that we have at Spotify, which is like when people have had time to experiment with these things, get comfortable. And in a lot of cases, we've had these local champions. So it's like, how can I use something like AiKA in my corner of the company and probing a use case for that corner of the company and then championing it to that particular department or mission. So other than that, I'm not sure if we've had like very noticeable inflection points when it comes to the platform.
But it's been fairly slow and steady. Not slow, but very steady increase. I mean, there are only so many users we can reach internally.
That sounds really great. I'm curious, you mentioned hacks a few times, I guess, where this kind of originated and then spikes in usage around hack weeks. Are there some kind of particularly memorable hacks that stand out in your mind of either things that existed early on that AiKA then had to integrate with from that first hack week where there were a whole bunch, or maybe more recently when there were spikes in usage? Did people do some particularly kind of cool and innovative things with AiKA?
Yeah, I mean, we were just fresh off this hack week, so we're sort of doing that exercise now of sort of evaluating what we should bring on. Perhaps not surprised, but overwhelmingly has been very popular during, both the previous hack week and this hack week. So we've been very fortunate to have a lot of hacks happening around what we do. Last year was a lot about knowledge ingestion. That was the new thing then. So opening that up to more and more people, making that available. I mean, as a part of that, we have a whole set of new data endpoints. Some of them are more or less standardized now and used by us. Like I think data endpoints originated there, things like that.
It was very meta. We get the data source about all the data endpoints that Spotify has internally. One of the things that people really want to do is to use AiKA to interact with databases, write SQL queries and all that. So yeah, I think in the first hack week, one of the most noticeable was like a data source about the data endpoint. So AiKA could understand how the endpoints look internally at Spotify and try to create queries based on that.
So then you can ask AiKA questions that will then look up in those data sources, or how does that work?
We're not fully there yet, although after this hack week, we might be. So that's more in lines with data discovery in terms of where can I find this information? Can you write me a query to do this? But we weren't at that point, not all the way there in terms of executing the query for you, for example, or retrieving the data that you're looking for. But we could guide you towards using natural language. Where can you find the data that you need to fulfill some objective or answer some question? But now I think this hack week has been very focused on expanding capabilities. Agentic is all the rage. MCP has been a huge focus of this hack week, the model context protocol, where we did a very concentrated effort before hack week to enable agentic features in AiKA, building an MCP client in AiKA, allowing people to write tools to extend the capabilities of AiKA, just like you would extend it with a data source. Now you could also extend it with tools that, might provide data, but they also might provide some actions outside of AiKA.
Tell me a little bit more about what that means. What are tools and actions you can do outside of AiKA? Is that like you can ask AiKA to do things on your behalf and then things change elsewhere?
I mean, perhaps that's more in the far future, but let's rewind a bit in terms of tools and tool calling, or function calling as it's called, that I think originated as a native capability of LLMs quite early on, back in late 2023 or something. You could pause the execution of the LLM. It could decide to call a function on your side based on some description that you have. You say, I have these functions available. You can decide to call them as part of your answering this question. We pause execution. I execute the function on my side. I give you the answer, and then you continue answering the question with what you have. So that was sort of a native capability early on. And now we're into MCP land. MCP is a protocol, model context protocol, launched by Anthropic in late last year as an open source project. And one of the problems it solves is separating where these functions or tools or extra capabilities reside. They don't need to be in your application, but they can be external. So it's like a remote call to an external function somewhere. So in terms of allowing AiKA to do more things, you can write an MCP for write about anything. And we've seen I think 37 different MCPs interacting with AiKA, but even more internally, I think up to something like 60. And an MCP server can have multiple tools, so it's a many to one. But you can have, for example, a GitHub server, which would define tools such as, give me the information about this pull request and this commit, retrieve this file, and so like atomic actions. And with an MCP like that, you can provide that to AiKA, and now you've extended the capabilities into reviewing a pull request, for example, if you want to do that. So that comes naturally by having access to these atomic tools. And we've seen a lot of different tools emerge. We've created some ourselves. Code Search, GHE, some BigQuery integrations, G Drive, Google Drive tool. And then, of course, these can be used in combination. So you can connect to multiple MCP servers, and now you have an agent capable of doing vastly different things than it could before.
We are on the early days of all that. So I think from here, the capabilities of a platform like AiKA is just going to explode. But yeah, we're focusing a lot right now on more read than write operations because, there's a lot of things that could go unexpectedly, to say the least, with unleashing LLMs to do some of these things. But it looks super, super promising.
That's super cool. That was one of the things I wanted to ask because I couldn't quite figure out if you meant like the agents do things in the sense of writing to places or do things in the sense of extracting additional data through these various actions. And it sounds like right now you're focusing much more on reading things.
Yeah, one of the objectives to be able to move to this landscape of working with AiKA and actually like doing actions with side effects. But yeah, we need to make sure that all this is like properly secured and not getting to unexpected places.
I think it's not so much we can't do it, but we want to be sure we do it in the right way, figure out things like human in the loop interactions. When does it make sense to have a human responsible for an action and things like that? So yeah, there's a lot to figure out here.
Yeah, I think going back a little bit, I think we've talked about agents and things being agentic and whatnot. Can you explain a little bit what that means? Is that just this like MCP tools plus LLM thing, or is there like something that makes something agentic?
That's the question in this. Everyone has like a slightly different understanding of what's an agent.
For me, and I think a lot of people at this point, at least, agency is a scale that you can be on. There is a range to it. There are these things that could be considered agentic, but might be more in terms of workflows. So even though you have access to tools, that doesn't necessarily mean that an LLM is in charge of deciding the path of execution, but that's predetermined by someone. I have a workflow. Fetch this file, extract that information, fetch this function. That's a workflow. But in terms of being more agentic, I think is when an LLM is in control of the flow of execution more independently. So what tool to call when and what to do with that information.
It's really a scale because with all this MCP and like other protocols, A2A, agent to agent, you can't like really end with a layered cake of agency. You could have a workflow with one of the steps of the workflow or one of the tools is actually an agent that is performing that part on deciding the flow and what sub tools to call from there. So you can still have agentic workflows with, at some extent, feels like a bit of a contradiction, but yeah, it's really a scale.
Yeah. So then in the like specifically to AiKA, what does it mean to add agentic capabilities then?
So we built sort of a lightweight React agent on top of AiKA, and that means we have an agentic loop where we take a user question, we reason about it, we say we have these tools available to us. How do we answer that question using these tools? So then we formulate a plan and start executing on that plan. And then based on the tool execution, we might need to revise this plan because we ended up in an unexpected place or we didn't get enough information. So then you go around the loop, create a new plan and a new set of actions. And then there is an end condition. Either you reach too many loops or you have a good enough answer. So that's the base agentic architecture.
So then let's get a little bit into specific things that make it very different from any other chatbot, or is it really just kind of a typical, I don't know what your prototypical example is. It's some chatbot you can find online plus Spotify data through RAG, or is there like a bunch more that makes it a little bit more special and unique to Spotify's use cases?
It's a sort of overloaded term by now because AiKA is the product and it's the team and it's, we have the different surfaces, we have the backstage, we have AiKA in Slack, we have AiKA a bit everywhere. But yeah, I think what makes it special is the platform aspect of it and the power that comes with that. But I mean, on top of that, we have built more custom things for specific use cases. I think it's worth mentioning the AiKA goalie bot, for example, our support bot. So a goalie is internally at Spotify someone who's taking care of the support load for a team for that week, for example. So a goalie bot would be a companion to reduce the effort in the support load for that person. So we created that bot, and that has more specific special interactions. We have some custom machine learning models there in terms of deciding when we have good enough information to answer a question. We can calculate the confidence score, and then based on that, we can do different things. We can have different interactions with the users, depending on how confident we are.
One of the different things that we have as a platform is we have this confidence scoring model based on how confident the system is in the answer provided. So with something like this, a bot, like we use it in Slack, it can change the behavior of how it interacts with users and only really interact when the confidence is high enough to not create noise or misinformation, which that was one of the things that despite the good adoption of Gen AI in the company, some people were very concerned about partially correct information or things that get mixed, especially with overloaded terms that are shared between different domains, like deploying or releasing. It's not the same for backend or for mobile. The goalie bot is built on two different pillars of AiKA as a platform. One is being able to filter the knowledge available to the bot. So then you can just make sure that it's going to answer only with information about the particular domain, particular set of components for a team, or a particular Slack support channel, and also the fact that we have a confidence on the answer. So based on that, the bot can automatically reply, which when you have teams working across time zones, that can save a lot of time. If you can get even if it's not a fully correct answer, but something that points you on the right direction, it's a huge time saver. Or even it can help new joiners on a team or at the company that they are not super familiar with the tech stack of their team or area of influence. So you can get partial answers that you can use to build your answer to the user, or you can it can auto-post things. Because, as an internal platform, a lot of things that we get asked, it's how is this helping the company? Are we getting more productive? This is the holy grail of questions with all this Gen AI spending and investment on hours developing things. And here it's one of the places where we have been able to create more of impact estimation. So because in something like AiKA, we've seen a lot of also playful interactions. So you can't really derive value only from pure interactions. There's been a lot of joking with it and people playing with it, which also has been very refreshing, and it's been one of the Spotify values. But here we've been able to quantify, and especially if you count the median hours to the first reply on a support thread and to the last reply, and think how many threads count as resolved, we've seen that when the bot is interacting, there's almost a 94% drop on time to first reply, which it's very significant. It went on average from 11 minutes to 36 seconds. And to the last reply, considering a thread closed, it gone from 145 minutes to 76 minutes, which is a 47% decrease on time saved. And when you add all that with all the threads and all the channels and all the people, you get really amazing amount of hours saved. So on the kind of lower estimation, counting only the hours saved on the user asking question and not accounting for the user answering the questions. Since we started counting, which was September 2024, when we deployed first the goalie bot, there's been accumulated between 6,000 and 7,000 full-time hours saved based on the interactions that we have with this.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Because I guess that first answer may be just because it's a computer answering as opposed to a human answering. But if you get the thread closed out much faster, that's really cool. So that sounds like an awesome metric.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of questions that get answered or asked over and over again. So the bot is very good at replying fast, because it's this was considered a good answer by a human yesterday. This other user is having the same exact problem based on the kind of question or the logs posted. So then it's
it's good because those are the type of questions humans don't want to answer.
Yes.
Repeated every day.
Yes. Those are the ones the bot likes the most and humans like the least.
Exactly.
So it's a perfect match.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how much usage there is at Spotify? Has it gone up as it's been developed, or what's the adoption process look like on your end?
Yeah, so, on an average week, we've grown to about 25% of the company use AiKA weekly. And if you look at developers only, that number is up to something like 87%.
Oh, wow.
And then we have weeks where we spike, like during Hack Weeks, we've had a huge increase in usage. So we had like 3,500 of our employees. So that's a good 40% of them using it. We saw 200,000+ messages sent through AiKA that week. A bunch of new AiKA clients created. So we have 52 different clients on top of AiKA that are third-party built by other developers. We have 60-something MCP servers built on top of this experience.
That's pretty amazing. There's clearly some product market fit there. I want to pivot a little bit. I think I read recently that we're going to start having a version of AiKA that is available to others through Spotify Portal for Backstage. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you're doing with AiKA externally for Portal?
Yes. So yeah, we're working on making AiKA or a version of it available at the Spotify Portal for Backstage. Of course, we developed AiKA and certain assumptions that we need to challenge to release it for customers of Portal. But yeah, that's the idea, to keep working on the things internally and making it available to the Portal customers.
In the future, what we talked about before, extending capabilities, MCPs, all of that sort of thing, it's very, well suited for an IDP like Backstage, where you could conceivably use an assistant like this to perform actions on top of the platform where you already have your APIs and documentation and resources and so on. It's going to be a very cool fit. And whatever we do internally is going to be possible to benefit other people as well.
Yeah, everything you've said so far makes it sound super cool. I imagine I would really want it if I didn't already have access to it within Spotify. Well, thank you both. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great.
Outside of AiKA, what other things are you nerding out about?
I'm sitting in my makerspace here. You can't really see it, but it's a lot of 3D printers, lasers, things like that. I have a toddler at home, so I'm mostly nerding out about whatever she wants to do nowadays.
What are some of the coolest things you've built with her?
It was way easier when she was small, but it was a lot of interactive light thingies that captures a small baby's imagination without having a real screen. I built actually a nice, okay, now it's going to sound like I built it for a dog, but it was sort of like a toy that vibrates and runs away from her. So she has to learn how to crawl and fetch it, and it lights up and makes noises and things like that.
That's super cool. I think that'll be tough to beat.
Yes, but to keep the theme of having kind of parallel lives, and due to the fact that actually he is doing all this, I just recently got like a 3D printer a couple of weeks ago, so I'm learning a bunch about that. I have a lot of catch up to do to get to his level. And then maybe it's not nerding out, but I really like to cook, and that's like my nerding out outlet before I got the 3D printer.
Thanks for listening. And you can learn more about AiKA and Spotify Portal for Backstage at backstage.spotify.com. Nerd Out at Spotify is produced by Spotify's Ted Vergakis and by Seaplane Armada, who also wrote our agentic theme song. I'm Dave Zolotusky. Thanks for nerding out with us.